The Christmas lights along Boylston Street blurred into streaks of red and gold as Marcus Chen pressed his forehead against the cold window of the Uber. His breath fogged the glass. Outside, couples walked arm in arm through the December slush, their laughter muffled by the car's interior. He'd stopped counting how many paired bodies he'd seen tonight. The number only made the weight in his chest heavier. The driver navigated through Back Bay traffic without speaking. Marcus appreciated the silence. Small talk would have required energy he didn't have, not after what had just happened. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He knew without looking it was Rachel. His sister possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense when things went wrong. The text would say something like, "How'd it go?" followed by hopeful emojis she insisted on using, despite being a litigation attorney who demolished opposing counsel for a living. He let it go to voicemail. The Riverside Tavern materialized ahead, its facade strung with icicle lights that reflected off the Charles River. Marcus had chosen this place carefully. Not too fancy, which might suggest he was trying too hard. Not too casual, which might imply he didn't care. The perfect middle ground for a first date with someone that his sister had met at her gym 3 weeks ago and declared exactly your type with the confidence of someone who'd been married and divorced and thought that qualified her as an expert. Vanessa, yoga instructor, kind eyes in her profile photo. Late 20s, which meant she was younger than him by almost 15 years. But Rachel had insisted age was just a number when you clicked with someone. Marcus had stopped arguing about these setups 6 months ago. Easier to show up, go through the motions. Add another name to the list of women who discovered his life came with complications they hadn't signed up for. He paid the driver and stepped into the December cold. The temperature had dropped since he'd left Somerville an hour ago. His breath emerged in white clouds. He'd dressed carefully tonight, the blue Oxford Jennifer had bought him before everything changed, pressed until the collar stood crisp against his neck. Dark jeans without holes. Leather shoes he'd polished that morning while Sophie ate breakfast and asked why he was making them so shiny. "Because I want to look nice for someone, sweetheart. Are you going on another date?" The question had carried no judgment, just curiosity from a 7-year-old who'd learned that daddy sometimes went out at night and came home quieter than when he'd left. He'd confirmed it, and she'd nodded, already focused back on her cereal the way kids could shift attention like flipping channels. He'd been grateful she hadn't asked more. Hadn't asked if this one would work out, if this woman would stay, if Sophie would finally get what she'd been wishing for since she was old enough to notice other kids had mothers, and she did not. Inside the restaurant, warmth enveloped him along with the smell of wood smoke and craft beer. The hostess smiled with professional brightness and asked if he had a reservation. He gave Vanessa's name, watched the woman's expression shift into knowing sympathy when she said his date hadn't arrived yet. Would he like to wait at the bar or be seated? Seated. Waiting at the bar meant witnesses to his solitude, strangers who'd wonder why a middle-aged man sat alone on a Friday night 2 weeks before Christmas. At least at a table he could pretend he'd arrived early, that someone was definitely coming, that he wasn't the kind of person who got stood up. Except he wasn't stood up. Not yet. Vanessa was just late, traffic probably. Or maybe she was stuck at her last yoga class of the day, some student asking questions about proper downward dog form. Innocent explanations existed for tardiness. He was overthinking anxiety, turning probability into paranoia the way it always did before these encounters. The hostess led him to a corner table near the window. He could see the river from here, its surface catching light from the buildings along Memorial Drive. Across the water, Cambridge rose dark against the winter sky. MIT's dome stood outlined in shadows. He'd gone to school across that river, back when life had seemed full of straightforward paths: get the degree, find the job, marry the girl, build the future. None of the variables had included becoming a widower at 38 or raising a daughter alone through grief that never quite faded, just learned to coexist with daily routines. He ordered a beer he had no intention of drinking. The server brought it with practiced efficiency, set it on a coaster, and retreated. Marcus wrapped his hands around the cold glass and waited. 6:45 became 6:50. 6:50 became 7. His phone stayed silent. No text saying she was running late, no apologetic call about traffic, just absence stretching into certainty. She wasn't coming. Whether she'd gotten cold feet or genuinely forgotten, or simply decided a 44-year-old accountant with baggage wasn't worth her Friday night, the result remained the same. Empty chair, untouched beer, Another entry in the ledger of failures. He should have left then. Should have put cash on the table for the beer he hadn't drunk and headed home to relieve the babysitter who'd agreed to stay late. But something kept him in the chair, some stubborn refusal to let the evening end without at least trying. Maybe Vanessa would still show. Maybe she was just really late. Maybe this time would be different from all the others. 7:15 arrived with footsteps he recognized without turning heels on hardwood, quick and purposeful. He straightened in his chair, arranged his face into something he hoped looked welcoming rather than relieved. But when he looked up, the woman approaching wasn't Vanessa. Rachel stood at his table, her courtroom expression firmly in place. She'd changed from her work suit into jeans and a sweater, but the lawyer armor remained in her posture, the set of her jaw. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat without asking permission. Marcus's stomach dropped. "You called her." Rachel held up her phone, showing him a text thread he couldn't read from this distance but could guess the contents of. "Vanessa messaged me 20 minutes ago. She's not coming." The words landed with familiar weight. He'd heard variations of this news 12 times in the past 2 years. The phrasing changed, not feeling it. Bad timing. You're great, but the meaning stayed constant. Thanks, but no thanks. You and your complicated life don't fit into my future plans. What reason did she give? Rachel's expression softened in the way that made everything worse. Pity from strangers he could handle. Pity from his sister felt like proof he'd failed at something fundamental. She said she's not ready for a ready-made family, that you're sweet, but it's not going to work. The exact words from the text probably included more qualifiers, more cushioning around the rejection. Women like Vanessa, kind women, the ones who genuinely felt bad about not wanting what he had to offer, always wrapped their nose in layers of compliments. "You're amazing, but I really like you, but Sophie sounds wonderful, but..." The "but" was the only word that mattered. Marcus picked up his beer and took a long drink. It tasted like every other beer in every other restaurant where he'd sat waiting for women who either showed up and left early or didn't show up at all. Bitter, cold, temporary distraction from the ache that lived permanently in his chest. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Her wedding ring caught the light, the one from her first marriage, that she still wore sometimes because she said it reminded her that survival was possible even after your world fell apart. "I'm sorry. I really thought she'd be different. They always think the next one will be different. That's why there's always a next one." His sister's face creased with concern that made her look older than 46. She'd been fighting his battles since they were kids in Quincy, sharing a bedroom in their parents' cramped apartment. She'd stood between him and bullies in middle school, talked him through panic attacks before college exams, held his hand at Jennifer's funeral when his own hands had shaken too badly to function. Now she was trying to fix his loneliness like it was a legal problem she could argue into submission. "Maybe you need to stop looking for a while. Just focus on you and Sophie." He'd heard this advice before from well-meaning friends, and his therapist and the grief counselor Jennifer's oncologist had recommended. Take time for yourself. Heal. Don't rush into anything. As if loneliness operated on a schedule, as if it would politely wait until he felt ready to address it. "Sophie asked me this morning why she doesn't have a mommy like the other kids." Rachel's hand tightened on his. "She's 7. Of course she's asking questions." I didn't know what to tell her. The truth hung between them, heavy and obvious. Sophie didn't have a mother because Jennifer had died when Sophie was 14 months old, too young to remember the woman who'd given her life and then been forced to leave it. Because Marcus had spent 6 years trying to be both parents and failing at both. Because every woman he met took one look at his situation and decided she'd rather find someone less complicated, someone whose life didn't include a grieving child and memorial photos on the mantle and the ghost of a perfect love that had ended too soon. The server approached and Rachel ordered wine without looking at the menu. When the woman left, Rachel leaned forward with her trial attorney focus. That meant she was about to say something Marcus wouldn't want to hear. "Have you considered that maybe traditional dating isn't working? Because you're not approaching this like a traditional situation?" "What does that mean? You're looking for someone to fall in love with you and Sophie simultaneously? That's a lot to ask from strangers over appetizers. Maybe you need to think about this differently, more practically." He pulled his hand back from hers. "Practically. Like what finds someone who wants a green card marriage? I'm saying maybe romance isn't the starting point. Maybe you need someone who wants the same things you want: family, partnership, stability, and you build the feelings from there. That's not how relationships work. Says who? Rachel's voice sharpened with the edge she used when cross-examining witnesses. Arranged marriages have existed for thousands of years. They work because both people go in with clear expectations and build something real from practical foundations. You're trying to find lightning in a bottle when maybe you should be looking for someone who needs what you can offer and can offer what you need. The logic was pure. Rachel reduced emotion to transaction. Find the rational solution, execute the plan. It had served her well in law, less well in her personal life given that her marriage had imploded when her husband decided he preferred the paralegal he was sleeping with to the wife he'd promised to honor. But she meant well. She always meant well when she tried to solve his problems with legal precision. I don't want to marry someone who's with me because it makes practical sense. Jennifer and I know. Rachel's interruption was gentle but firm. You and Jen had something beautiful. But she's gone, Marcus. And you're here exhausted and lonely trying to do everything alone because you think that's what honoring her means. She wouldn't want this for you. The words struck too close to truth. Jennifer had made him promise in those final days when the morphine barely touched her pain, and every breath was a battle she was losing. Promise me you'll be happy. Promise you won't let this break you. Promise you'll give Sophie a good life, even if I can't be there to help. He'd promised everything she'd asked, meaning every word in that hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and death. But promises made in grief were easier than promises kept in reality. Being happy required more than deciding to be happy. It required meeting someone who could accept his life as it was, complications included. And that person, it seemed, did not exist within his social circle or his sister's gym or anywhere the dating apps could find her. The wine arrived. Rachel drank half the glass in one go, then fixed him with the stare she probably used on hostile witnesses. Let me set you up one more time. I know someone at my firm recently divorced has a kid of her own. She'd understand what you're dealing with. No more setups. I can't keep doing this. Then what? You're just going to resign yourself to being alone? The question carried no judgment, just genuine concern. Rachel wanted him to be happy. Everyone wanted him to be happy. The problem was that happiness seemed to require variables he couldn't control. Finding someone who wanted him and Sophie as a package, who saw his daughter as an addition rather than a complication, who could look at his small life and see possibilities instead of limitations. I don't know, maybe I'll try the apps again. The apps were worse. At least blind dates came with personal recommendations, some filter of compatibility. Apps were warfare. Swipe through hundreds of faces, match with women who unmatched the moment he mentioned Sophie in his profile message, back and forth with people who disappeared when conversation shifted from banter to substance. He deleted Hinge and Bumble 6 months ago after a woman had told him point blank that single fathers were damaged goods, and she wasn't interested in being anyone's rehabilitation project. Rachel finished her wine and signaled for another. Around them, the restaurant filled with Friday night energy couples, leaning close over candles, groups of friends laughing over shared plates, the ambient buzz of people who belonged to someone or something. Marcus felt like a ghost at his own table watching a world he no longer had access to. Come to Christmas dinner at my place. Rachel's shift in topic was strategic, moving them away from dangerous emotional territory. Bring Sophie. David's making that ridiculous turkey he brines for 3 days. David was Rachel's boyfriend, a software engineer she'd been seeing for 8 months. Nice guy, patient with Rachel's work schedule and emotional unavailability. The kind of steady presence Marcus used to be for Jennifer, back when steady was enough. We'll be there. And you'll actually talk to people, not just sit in the corner doing your wounded widower routine. The accusation stung because it was accurate. He'd become that person at social gatherings, the one who made small talk for exactly long enough to be polite, then retreated to the edges and waited until he could leave without being rude. Grief had turned him into someone he didn't recognize, someone who found exhausting what used to feel effortless. I'll talk. Promise, promise. Rachel stood, leaving money for her wine on the table. She leaned down and kissed his forehead the way their mother used to when they were small and the world was simple. You're a good man, Marcus, a good father. The right person will see that. When this question came out, raw, stripped of the control he usually maintained. Rachel's eyes filled with the same helplessness he felt. She didn't have an answer. Nobody did. Timing wasn't something you could argue into existence or negotiate like a settlement. It happened when it happened, and until then, you just kept showing up, kept trying, kept hoping that eventually the math would work in your favor. She left him alone at the table with his untouched beer and the ghost of another failed attempt. He should go home, should call it a night, pick Sophie up from the neighbor who'd agreed to watch her fall asleep to the sound of her breathing in the next room. Tomorrow was Saturday. They'd make pancakes, go to the library, do all the weekend rituals that made their small life feel complete, even when it wasn't. But he didn't move, couldn't move. Some part of him refused to let the evening end like this, another data point in the spreadsheet of his loneliness. Another night that proved he was going to spend the rest of his life there alone because no one wanted what he had to offer. The server appeared to clear Rachel's wine glass. "Can I get you anything else? Just the check." She returned with the bill and he paid cash, leaving more tip than the single beer warranted. He stood pulling on his coat, preparing himself for the cold walk to the tea station and the train ride home, and the explanation he'd have to give Sophie tomorrow when she asked how his date went. He'd learned to lie smoothly. It was fine, nothing serious. "Maybe we'll try again sometime." Sophie had learned to stop asking follow-up questions, reading the truth in his tone, even when he didn't speak it. That's when the voice cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Excuse me, would you consider being my husband?" Marcus turned certain he'd misheard. Certain exhaustion and disappointment had collaborated to create an auditory hallucination. The woman sat at the table directly adjacent to his, facing him with an expression that suggested she'd said something completely normal rather than utterly insane. Late 30s, he guessed. Dark hair pulled back from a face that would have been severe except for the vulnerability flickering in her eyes. She wore a charcoal suit that screamed money, the kind of tailoring that cost more than his monthly rent. Everything about her communicated power, from the straight line of her spine to the way she held his gaze without flinching. "I'm sorry." The words came out automatic, brain still processing what his ears had heard. "I asked if you would consider being my husband." The woman's voice remained steady, no hint of humor or uncertainty. "I'm serious." The restaurant seemed to tilt. This had to be a prank. Hidden cameras, some viral video setup where strangers proposed to people and filmed their reactions for internet points. He glanced around looking for accomplices, but found only normal Friday night diners, ignoring them completely. "I don't understand." The woman gestured to the empty chair across from his abandoned table, the seat where Vanessa should have been. "I heard everything. Your date, what she said about not being ready for your daughter." Heat crawled up Marcus's neck. Bad enough to be rejected. Worse to discover someone had witnessed the whole humiliating conversation with Rachel, had heard him admit his failures to his sister in a public restaurant, like he had no sense of privacy or dignity. "Look, I appreciate whatever this is, but I need to go." He turned toward the exit, but her next words stopped him. "Wait, please." The please carried enough weight to make him pause. He looked back. She'd stood from her table, not desperate, but firm, a woman used to being heard when she spoke. "I'm serious about my question. 5 minutes of your time. If you still think I'm insane after that, you can leave." Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. This was how horror movies started. Stranger makes bizarre offer, protagonist ignores red flags, everything ends badly. But something in her expression stopped the refusal before it formed. Not pity, which he'd learned to identify from across a room, something more like recognition, the way you felt when you saw your own reflection in unexpected places. He sat back down. The woman returned to her table but angled her chair so they faced each other across the narrow gap between their setups. Up close, he could see the exhaustion lines around her eyes, the tension in her jaw. Whatever mask she wore for the world, it was starting to crack. "My family has been pressuring me to get married for 3 years." The words came out measured, like she'd rehearsed them, but was still figuring out the delivery. Marcus said nothing. Waited. "Every holiday they parade men in front of me. Lawyers, doctors, venture capitalists, anyone they think has the right pedigree and bank account. They've decided I'm broken because I'm 37 and unmarried without children, and they're determined to fix me whether I want fixing or not." She pulled out her phone, set it on the table between them. Her screensaver was a corporate logo, Technova Solutions, a name Marcus vaguely recognized from business news. "Every man I've dated in the past 4 years has wanted two things: my money, or my connections. I built my company from nothing, and now that it's worth something, I can't find anyone who wants me instead of what I have. The bitterness in her voice was familiar. Different circumstances, same isolation. Marcus knew what it felt like to be reduced to components, not a whole person, just parts that added up to more trouble than value. The server appeared and the woman ordered wine for both of them without asking Marcus's preference. When they were alone again, she leaned forward slightly. I want a family, not the transaction my parents keep trying to arrange where I marry someone suitable and produce heirs like it's a business merger. I want people who actually care about each other, who show up for each other, who choose to be together because they want to be, not because society or money or pressure tells them they should. Why me? Fair question. The woman's mouth curved into something almost resembling a smile. I've been sitting here for 40 minutes waiting for my own disappointing evening to begin. I heard you talking to the bartender before your date arrived. You told him your daughter drew you a picture of a reindeer this morning because she's learning about Rudolph in school and she thinks he's the best character because being different makes him special. Marcus blinked. He had said that making conversation while the bartender poured his beer. Small talk about Sophie, the way he filled silence with the one good thing in his life. I can't have children. The confession came without warning, stripped of emotion. Just fact delivered like a medical diagnosis. Endometriosis. Severe enough that by the time I got it diagnosed, the damage was done. Irreversible. My ex-fiancé called off our wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony when I told him. Said he wanted a real family, not a defective wife who couldn't give him children. Anger flared hot in Marcus's chest, instant and protective. That's horrible. Yes, it is. But it's also my reality. The woman held his gaze. You have a daughter who needs a mother figure. I want to be a mother, but can't physically have children. You keep getting rejected for having a child. I keep getting rejected for not being able to produce them. What if we helped each other? The logic was insane. Utterly, completely insane. You didn't marry strangers because you both had problems that might theoretically solve each other. That wasn't how functional relationships worked. But then again, traditional relationships weren't working either. 12 rejections in 2 years. How many more before he gave up entirely, before Sophie stopped asking about getting a mother, before he became one of those people who convinced themselves they preferred being alone? I don't know anything about you. Not even your name. Elena Hartwell. I'm CEO of Technova Solutions, cybersecurity software for financial institutions. Started the company 11 years ago in my garage after leaving a job at State Street, where I was criminally underpaid and professionally underestimated. Now we have 220 employees and 47 million in annual revenue. She recited the facts like items on a resume, achievements measured in metrics that meant nothing to human connection, but everything to proving her worth in the world she came from. I'm 37, born and raised in Boston Back Bay specifically. My parents are difficult in ways that would take hours to fully explain. I have no siblings. I like Thai food and documentaries about deep space. I hate small talk and people who chew with their mouths open. Despite everything, Marcus felt his lips twitch toward a smile. The specificity was oddly charming, these random details that painted a picture of someone real beneath the corporate polish. Marcus Chen, 44, forensic accountant at Morrison & Associates. I catch people who steal from their own companies, analyze financial patterns, identify fraud, testify in court when cases go to trial. My daughter Sophie is 7. She loves art and hates broccoli with a passion usually reserved for war criminals. My wife Jennifer died 6 years ago from ovarian cancer. I've been alone ever since. Elena nodded slowly as if he'd confirmed hypotheses she'd already formed. I looked you up while you were waiting for your date. His eyebrows rose. That was fast. I make 6-figure decisions daily. Basic due diligence is reflexive at this point. She reached into the leather bag at her feet and pulled out a manila envelope, slid it across the space between their tables. Marcus opened it with hands that didn't feel entirely like his own. Inside 20 pages of legal language. He flipped through his accounting brain, automatically parsing the structure. Prenuptial agreement. Separation of finances. No claim to her company or personal assets. Provisions for Sophie's education and health care. Dissolution terms if either party wanted out after 2 years minimum. It was the most romantic and unromantic document he'd ever seen. You've been planning this, not a question. Elena's expression shifted something raw moving beneath the surface. I've been alone for 4 years, Marcus. Since Bradford, my ex decided I was defective merchandise. I'm tired of being alone. Tired of my parents treating me like I'm incomplete because my body won't cooperate with their expectations. Tired of dates with men who see dollar signs instead of a person. Her voice dropped lower, nearly swallowed by the ambient noise of the restaurant. And I think you're tired too. Tired of rejection. Tired of doing everything alone. Tired of your daughter asking for something you can't give her. The words hit because they were true. He was tired. Bone deep, soul level exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't touch. Exhausted from being both parents, from working full-time while trying to show up for school events and soccer practice and art class. From calculating whether he could afford new shoes for Sophie or if last year's would work one more season. From lying to his daughter when she asked why she didn't have a mother, why her family looked different from everyone else's. This is insane. The words lacked conviction even as he spoke them. Probably. Elena's mask slipped entirely for just a moment, and underneath was raw vulnerability that matched his own. But I'm willing to try if you are. The server returned with their wine. Elena picked up her glass but didn't drink, just held it like a prop between them. Marcus wrapped his fingers around his own glass, feeling the cold condensation against his palm. Let's eat. Get to know each other like normal people on a normal date. You can tell me about Sophie, about your work, about what you actually want from life. I'll do the same. After dessert, you can decide if I'm too crazy to consider, or if maybe, just maybe, this insane idea has potential. What if I say no, then we finish dinner? Go our separate ways and never see each other again. No pressure, no obligation. Just two lonely people who had a strange conversation on a Friday night in December. And if I say yes, then we figure out what comes next. Together. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that terrified and tempted in equal measure. Together. Not alone anymore. Not doing everything himself, not being the only one Sophie depended on, not carrying the weight of single parenthood without anyone to share the burden. But also not in control, not independent, not able to pretend he had everything handled when he very clearly did not. Marcus looked at Elena Hartwell across the gap between their tables. This woman who'd approached a stranger with an insane proposal, who'd done her research and come prepared with legal documents, who was offering him something that should have been crazy, but somehow made more sense than any of the traditional dating he'd been attempting for 2 years. He thought about going home tonight and telling Sophie the date hadn't worked out again. Thought about spending another year alone, another year of rejections and failed setups and slow resignation to permanent solitude. Thought about Sophie's wish for a mother, about promises he'd made to Jennifer, about the life he wanted versus the life he had. Then he thought about this woman who'd admitted she couldn't have children, who'd been called defective by someone who should have loved her, who'd built a company from nothing and still felt incomplete because society told her a woman without children was somehow less than whole. Okay, the word escaped before he could overthink it. Okay, let's have dinner. Let's talk like normal people. And at the end, I'll decide if you're completely insane or just insane enough to work. Elena's smile transformed her face, erasing years and revealing someone younger, more hopeful beneath the armor. I can live with those terms. Marcus signaled the server and asked to move to Elena's table. The woman looked confused but accommodated, clearing his abandoned setup and bringing fresh place settings. He slid into the chair across from Elena, close enough now to see the flecks of amber in her dark eyes, the tension lines bracketing her mouth. Tell me about Sophie. The request opened floodgates. Marcus found himself talking more than he had in months, maybe years. He described Sophie's talent for drawing, how she could lose herself for hours with paper and colored pencils. The times she'd tried to give their neighbor's dog a bath and flooded the backyard, turning it into a muddy disaster zone. Parent-teacher conferences where he sat alone among couples and felt like an imposter. Like any minute someone would figure out he was failing at the most important job he'd ever have. Elena listened with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. She didn't look at her phone once, didn't let her attention wander to other tables or the television over the bar, just focused on him, completely asking follow-up questions that proved she was actually processing information rather than performing politeness. When the server came to take their order, Elena asked what Sophie's favorite food was. When Marcus said pancakes with chocolate chips, Elena ordered the restaurant's take on breakfast for dinner without hesitation. Marcus got something he didn't taste later, too focused on the conversation to care about food. Tell me about your company. Elena's eyes lit up in a way they hadn't before, passion, replacing the careful control she wore like armor. I saw a gap in the market, mid-sized banks that couldn't afford enterprise-level security, but needed better protection than off-the-shelf solutions. Everyone was focused on the Fortune 500 companies or the tiny startups. Nobody was serving the middle ground. So I built something specifically for that sector. She described teaching herself to code at night while working days as a junior analyst at State Street, sleeping 4 hours, living on instant noodles, maxing out credit cards to make payroll in those early years when every month was a dice roll between survival and bankruptcy. My parents told me I was throwing my life away. My father, he's old Boston money expectations carved in granite, said I should have gone to law schools like he wanted. My mother, who spent her whole life trying to fit into that world, said no man would want a woman who works 70-hour weeks. Bitterness crept into her tone. They cut me off financially when I refused to quit. Said I needed to learn about consequences, that I'd come crawling back when reality hit. Instead, I proved them wrong, built something they couldn't deny or diminish. And they hate that almost as much as they hate that I'm 37 and unmarried. Did you, Marcus asked, learn about consequences? I learned that people who claim to love you shouldn't attach conditions to that love. That family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when things get hard. The woman leaned back in her chair. My parents haven't figured that out yet. Not sure they ever will. The server cleared their plates and brought dessert creme brulee neither of them touched. Elena pulled out her phone and set it on the table between them. Put your number in. Let me meet Sophie. Let's see if this insane idea could actually work before we commit to anything legal. Marcus's hands trembled as he picked up the phone. This was the moment. The point where he either ran back to safety or jumped off the cliff into complete unknown territory. He typed in his number, handed the phone back. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. Relief maybe, or hope. I mean it. I want to meet Sophie. Want to see if we can build something real out of this practical arrangement. Not romance first, that feels like too much pressure for both of us. But partnership, friendship maybe, and see if that can grow into something more. Why are you really doing this? The question came out harsher than he intended, but Elena didn't flinch. Because I'm tired of being alone. And because when I heard you talk about your daughter tonight, the love in your voice, the pride, I thought that's what family sounds like. That's what I want. She stood gathering her bag and coat, left cash on the table to cover both meals, more than enough. Then she paused before the exit, turning back. Think about it, Marcus. But don't take too long. Loneliness has a way of making us settle for less than we deserve, and I think we both deserve better than settling. Then she walked out into the Christmas lights and winter darkness, leaving him alone at the table with a phone that buzzed immediately with an incoming text. This is Elena. Call me when you're ready. For the first time in 6 years, Marcus felt something other than resignation. Something dangerous and terrifying and impossible to ignore. Hope. He sat in the restaurant for another 20 minutes, staring at Elena's message, trying to process what had just happened. A stranger had propositioned him for marriage based on overhearing one conversation, had come prepared with legal documents and research about his professional life, had looked at his messy, complicated reality and seen potential instead of problems. It was insane. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was how people ended up in bad situations, trusting strangers who made impossible promises, believing in solutions that seemed too good to be true. But Elena hadn't promised anything impossible. Hadn't claimed love or passion or happily ever after. Just offered partnership, practical help, the possibility that two lonely people might build something worthwhile together. Marcus paid his own bill, she'd left cash for hers, and walked out into the December cold. The T ride back to Somerville passed in a blur. His mind couldn't stop replaying the conversation, analyzing Elena's proposal from every angle, like he analyzed financial statements for inconsistencies. On one hand, completely insane. You didn't marry strangers. You didn't build families on transactional foundations. You didn't let your daughter meet someone who might be using you for some ulterior purpose he couldn't identify yet. On the other, what if Rachel was right? What if traditional romance wasn't the path for someone in his situation? What if approaching this practically two people with compatible needs making a deliberate choice made more sense than waiting for lightning to strike? He emerged from Davis Square Station and walked the 6 blocks to his rental house. The lights were on. Mrs. Kowalski from 2 doors down had agreed to watch Sophie for the evening. 72 years old, widowed for a decade, she treated Sophie like the granddaughter she'd never had. She'd been charging him $20 an evening until he'd discovered she was putting that money into a college fund she'd started for Sophie without telling him. Now he paid her 40, and she pretended to be annoyed, but always said yes when he called. Mrs. Kowalski looked up from her knitting when Marcus entered. "How was your date?" "Fine." It didn't work out. The older woman's expression shifted into the sympathy he'd learned to expect. She patted his hand as she gathered her things. "The right person will come along, Marcus. You just have to keep faith." He paid her and waited until she'd walked safely back to her own house before checking on Sophie. His daughter slept sprawled across her twin bed covers, kicked off one arm, wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since infancy. Her face was peaceful, unmarked by the complications that dominated his life. Marcus covered her with the blanket she'd rejected in sleep, brushed hair back from her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake, just made a small sound, and rolled toward the wall. He sat on the edge of her bed, watching her breathe, trying to imagine bringing a stranger into this small, safe world they'd built together. Elena wanted to meet Sophie, wanted to see if they could build something real. The offer terrified him. What if Sophie liked Elena, and then Elena decided this was too complicated? What if his daughter got attached and then got hurt when the arrangement fell apart? He'd spent 6 years protecting Sophie from exactly that kind of loss. But he'd also spent 6 years protecting himself, using Sophie as a shield against vulnerability, telling himself he was being a good father when really he was being a coward, afraid to let anyone close enough to hurt them both, afraid that choosing someone new meant betraying Jennifer's memory, afraid that happiness was something that happened to other people, not to widowed accountants who couldn't afford anything beyond survival. His phone buzzed in his pocket. "Rachel, how'd the rest of the night go? Please tell me you didn't just go straight home." He stared at the message for a long moment. Should he tell his sister about Elena, about the insane proposal and the prenup, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward he hadn't considered? Not yet. Not until he'd figured out what he wanted to do. Rachel would either tell him he was crazy or start planning the wedding, and neither response would help him think clearly. Stayed for dinner. Did some thinking. "I'm okay." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. Okay as in actually okay, or okay as in you're lying but don't want to talk about it. "Actually okay. Talk tomorrow." He silenced his phone and went to his bedroom. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, kitchen, barely big enough for their small table. They'd lived here for 4 years, since the landlord had offered him a deal he couldn't refuse after Jennifer died, and the medical bills had nearly destroyed them financially. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and Sophie had never known anything else. What would she think of Elena's penthouse in Seaport, the gleaming appliances and floor-to-ceiling windows, and space that probably cost more per month than Marcus earned in a year? Would she feel out of place, or would she see it as an adventure, the way kids could transform anything into magic? Marcus pulled out his laptop and did what Elena had done: research. Technova Solutions had excellent reviews on Glassdoor. Employees talked about competitive salaries, strong benefits, a CEO who remembered people's names and asked about their families. The company had been profiled in Boston Business Journal 3 times in the past 5 years. Always growing, always innovating, always one step ahead of competitors. Elena Hartwell had a LinkedIn profile that read like an entrepreneurial success story. Summa cum laude from BC, started in finance, pivoted to tech, built something from nothing. No mention of personal life, no photos beyond a professional headshot that made her look severe and unapproachable. He searched for Bradford, her ex-fiancé, but found nothing useful. Probably changed his privacy settings after the breakup, or maybe Elena had scrubbed him from her digital footprint. Either way, the man remained a ghost, present only in the damage he'd done. Marcus closed his laptop and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The heating system ticked and groaned. Outside traffic on Highland Avenue hummed at intervals. Sophie's breathing carried from the next room, steady and soft. He pulled up Elena's text one more time. "This is Elena. Call me when you are ready." When would he be ready? Tomorrow. Next week, never. How did you know when to take a risk this big, when the stakes included not just your own heart, but your daughter's future? The answer he realized was that you never knew. You just decided, made a choice and dealt with the consequences. Hoped that the universe rewarded courage more than it punished stupidity. He set his phone on the nightstand and closed his eyes. Tomorrow was Saturday. He'd make Sophie pancakes. They'd go to the library, check out books about reindeer and whatever else caught her attention. Normal weekend rhythms that made their small life feel complete even when it wasn't. And maybe sometime in the next few days, he'd call Elena Hartwell, ask her to meet his daughter, see if this insane idea had any potential beyond desperation and loneliness. Maybe. 3 days passed before Marcus called. 3 days of normal routines that felt increasingly hollow. Breakfast with Sophie, work analyzing spreadsheets that tracked money, he'd never have evenings helping with homework, and reading stories and tucking his daughter into bed before collapsing into his own exhausted sleep. 3 days of thinking about Elena's offer from every possible angle. The practical benefits: financial security for Sophie, a mother figure she'd been asking for partnership in the overwhelming task of parenthood. The risks: bringing a stranger into their lives, modeling a relationship based on transaction rather than love, teaching Sophie that families were built on need rather than connection. Rachel called twice. He avoided her both times, not ready to explain what he was considering. His sister would have opinions, strong ones, and he needed to figure out his own position before defending it against her cross-examination. Monday morning started the same way every Monday started for the past 6 years. 5:30 alarm. Shower while the coffee's brewed. Wake Sophie at 6, help her pick out clothes that weren't too mismatched. Make breakfast while she ate at their small kitchen table, chattering about weekend events he'd already heard 3 times but listened to anyway, because hearing her voice made the exhaustion worthwhile. He packed her lunch: turkey sandwich string, cheese apple slices. He knew she'd trade away juice box. Drove her to Somerville Elementary by 7:15. Watched her run toward the building with bare backpack bouncing, purple coat bright against the gray morning. Then sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes before starting his own commute, letting himself breathe in the quiet before the real day began. 45 minutes on the Red Line to downtown crossing. Packed shoulder to shoulder with commuters who'd perfected the art of avoiding eye contact. Up to Morrison and Associates on the 14th floor of a building that had been modern in 1985 and hadn't updated since. His desk was in a cluster of 5 cubicles, gray fabric walls that absorbed sound and hope in equal measure. He booted up his computer and dove into the preliminary audit for Newton Energy, a mid-sized utility company in Waltham that wanted to go public in 18 months. His job was finding problems before the SEC did, tracking every expense, every asset, every liability, looking for patterns that didn't fit, numbers that were too clean, transactions that happened at convenient times. He was good at this work, had a knack for seeing what other accountants missed, connections that weren't obvious until you looked at the full picture instead of individual pieces. But it was also mind-numbing. Hour after hour of comparing figures, building models, testing assumptions. The kind of work that let your mind wander if you weren't careful. His mind wandered to Elena. The proposal still seemed insane in the harsh light of Monday morning. Marriage to a stranger because they were both lonely and could theoretically solve each other's problems. It sounded like the premise of a bad reality show, not real life. Except Elena hadn't seemed unreal. She'd been direct, practical, almost clinical in her assessment of their situation. No promises of love or passion, just partnership that might possibly become something more. 2 people making a deliberate choice instead of waiting for feelings that might never arrive. At lunch, Marcus pulled up his personal spreadsheet, the password-protected file where he tracked every dollar of his life. The numbers told their brutal story. Monthly income after taxes, $4,200. Rent, $2,400. After-school care for Sophie, $800. Utilities, $200. Car payment and insurance, $300. Groceries, $600. Everything else: clothes, entertainment, unexpected expenses, whatever was left. He was saving roughly $400 a month. At that rate, he'd have enough for a down payment on a modest house in 17 years. Sophie would be graduated from college by then, assuming he could afford to send her to college at all. His current savings, $12,000, would cover maybe 1 semester at UMass if she lived at home. The partner track Ted Morrison kept dangling would help. Senior accountants made 90,000 base plus bonuses. But partner track also meant 60-hour weeks, weekend work, constant travel. How was he supposed to do that while raising Sophie alone? If he married Elena, Sophie's education would be covered. She'd have opportunities Marcus couldn't provide alone. Private school if she wanted it. Art classes at actual museums instead of the free programs at the community center. College without crushing debt. A future that didn't require choosing between dreams and financial reality. All it would cost was his pride, his independence, his belief that he could do this alone. His phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Kowalski. Sophie asked if you're going on another date soon. Told her you might be. Hope that's okay. Marcus stared at the message. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that daddy was considering marrying someone she'd never met because a stranger had made a practical proposal in a restaurant? You didn't. You either made the decision and dealt with the consequences, or you walked away and kept struggling alone. He pulled up Elena's contact, stared at her name on a screen, imagined calling, saying yes, letting this insane plan move forward. Imagined saying no, deleting her number, going back to failed setups in slow resignation. His finger hovered over the call button. Tuesday was worse. Sophie woke up complaining her throat hurt. Marcus felt her forehead fever, not high, but present. He called in sick to work using one of his 3 allowed days without dipping into vacation time he was saving for Sophie's spring break. Spent the day monitoring her temperature, feeding her popsicles, letting her watch more television than he usually allowed. By afternoon, she'd fallen asleep on the couch. Marcus sat in the kitchen, laptop open to Newton Energy financials. He couldn't focus on mine, circling back to Elena's offer. His phone rang. Rachel, ignoring her again, felt like cowardice, and she'd just show up at his house if he kept avoiding her. You've been dodging me. His sister's voice carried no judgment, just statement of fact. Sophie's sick. I've been busy. Bullshit. What's going on? Marcus hesitated. Rachel was his closest confidant. Had been since they were kids sharing a bedroom because their parents couldn't afford anything bigger. She'd helped him through Jennifer's death, sat with him at the funeral, held Sophie while he fell apart. If anyone would understand, it would be her. I met someone. Silence on the line, then careful optimism. That's good. Who is she? It's complicated. He explained the whole surreal encounter. Elena's proposal, the prenup, her reasons. When he finished, Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Are you considering it? I don't know. It's insane. It's practical. Rachel's lawyer brain kicked in immediately. Honestly, Marcus, it's not that different from how wealthy families used to arrange marriages. Strategic alliances, mutual benefit. Both parties know exactly what they're getting into. That was centuries ago. Please. It still happens in some circles. And this woman, Elena, she's being honest about what she wants. No pretense of love, no false expectations. Just two people helping each other out. That's more honest than half the marriages I see in divorce court. What about Sophie? What about her? Rachel's voice gentled. She'd gain a mother figure, financial security opportunities you can't provide alone. Seems like she'd benefit most from this arrangement. And what do I tell her? That daddy married a stranger because it made economic sense. You tell her you found someone who cares about both of you, who wants to be part of your family. Kids are more adaptable than we give them credit for, Marcus. Sophie just wants you to be happy. She wants a complete family. This could give her that. At what cost? At the cost of your pride. Rachel's tone sharpened, which frankly you can afford to lose. You're a great father, but you're also exhausted. I can hear it in your voice. How long can you keep this up? Working full-time, raising Sophie alone, trying to date women who reject you the moment they learn about your situation. So I should just marry this woman. I'm saying you should at least meet her again. Let her meet Sophie. See if there's potential for something real to develop. You might be surprised. After they hung up, Marcus sat in the quiet house listening to Sophie's congested breathing from the living room. Rachel had a point. He was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix, that came from carrying everything alone for too long. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe this insane idea could actually work. Wednesday evening after Sophie was asleep, Marcus called. Elena answered on the second ring. You're overthinking this. Despite everything, Marcus almost laughed. How do you know? Because I've been doing the same thing. I almost deleted your number twice. Started to convince myself you were right, that this was crazy, that I should just accept being alone. A pause waited with things unsaid. I'm scared too, Marcus. This isn't easy for me either. I have a daughter. She's been through enough losing her mother. I can't bring someone into her life unless I'm sure. You'll never be sure. That's not how life works. Elena's voice carried certainty born from experience. But staying alone because you're afraid of failure, that's not protecting Sophie. That's protecting yourself. The words stung because they were true. He had been protecting himself, using Sophie as justification for avoiding risk, telling himself he was being responsible, when really he was being cowardly. Saturday, the word came out before he could overthink it. There's a park near my house, Lexington Common, 10 in the morning. Bring whatever you need to feel comfortable. I'll be there with Sophie. Silence on Elena's end. Then quietly, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We might meet and realize this is completely impossible. Or we might meet and realize it's not. Marcus hung up and sat in the darkness of his bedroom, wondering if he'd just made the best decision of his life or the worst. Tomorrow he'd have to explain to Sophie that they were meeting someone. Figure out how to frame it so a 7-year-old could understand without getting her hopes up too high. But tonight he just let himself feel it. The dangerous, terrifying possibility that maybe he didn't have to do this alone anymore. That maybe Elena Hartwell could become part of their lives. That maybe Sophie would finally have what she'd been asking for. Maybe. Thursday passed in a blur of work and worry. Marcus found himself checking his phone obsessively, making sure Elena hadn't texted to cancel. She didn't contact him at all, actually, which somehow felt worse than backing out. Radio silence that let his anxiety build without interruption. Friday morning, he told Sophie about the park plan. We're meeting someone tomorrow, a friend of mine. Sophie looked up from her cereal, suspicious in the way of children who'd learned to read subtext. What kind of friend? Her name is Elena. She's someone I met recently. She wants to meet you. Is she your girlfriend? No. Then because honesty mattered even when it complicated things, not exactly. She's just someone I'm getting to know. Someone who might become important in our lives if we all get along. Sophie processed this syrup dripping from her spoon. Okay. Can I bring my sketchbook? Of course. The easy acceptance startled him. He'd prepared for questions for concern for Sophie to push back against meeting a stranger. But she just nodded and returned to her breakfast, already moving on to the next thought. Marcus envied that resilience. The ability to accept new information and adapt without spiraling into anxiety about all possible outcomes. Kids lived in the present in ways adults forgot how to do. That night, he lay awake running scenarios. What if Sophie hated Elena on sight? What if Elena took one look at their modest life and realized she'd made a mistake? What if this whole thing blew up spectacularly and left Sophie more damaged than before? What if it worked? That possibility terrified him most of all, because if it worked, everything would change. His small, controlled life would expand in ways he couldn't predict or manage. He'd be vulnerable again, dependent on someone else's choices and constancy, open to the kind of loss that had nearly destroyed him 6 years ago. But if it worked, Sophie would have a mother. He'd have a partner. They'd have opportunities and security and the chance to build something bigger than survival. He fell asleep sometime after 2 dreams, full of frozen moments: Jennifer's face, Sophie's laugh, Elena's eyes watching him across a restaurant table, all of it swirling together into images that made no sense when examined, but felt weighted with meaning while he slept. Saturday morning arrived with crystal clarity. Cold December sunshine, temperature in the low 30s, no wind. Perfect park weather if you dress for it. Marcus made chocolate chip pancakes, Jennifer's recipe that he'd perfected over 6 years of Saturday mornings. Sophie ate 3, getting syrup on her chin, chattering about the art project her teacher had assigned for winter break. Something about drawing your family doing something together. I'm going to draw us at the park today with your friend Elena. What if you don't like her? Sophie considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. Then I'll draw us at the park with just you and me. But I think I'll like her. You wouldn't bring someone mean to meet me. The faith in her voice made his chest tight. She trusted him. Trusted that he wouldn't bring someone into her life who would hurt her. He couldn't betray that trust. They drove to Lexington Common, 15 minutes from their house. Marcus had chosen this park deliberately neutral territory, not too far from home, if they needed to leave quickly, familiar enough that Sophie would feel comfortable. They'd been here dozens of times. She knew where the good swings were, which trees climbed best, where the ducks congregated near the pond. Elena was already there when they arrived. Marcus spotted her from the parking lot sitting on a bench near the pond, transformed from the CEO he'd met into someone softer. Jeans that looked expensive but casual. Navy sweater, winter boots, hair down instead of pulled back falling past her shoulders in waves. She could have been any normal woman spending Saturday morning at a park. She stood as they approached, and Marcus saw genuine nervousness in her expression. Good, at least he wasn't the only one terrified. Elena, this is Sophie. Sophie, this is Elena. Sophie studied Elena with the brutal honesty of children, no social filters to soften observation. Hi, you're pretty, Elena smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way her professional mask never had. Thank you, you're pretty too. I love your coat. It's purple, that's my favorite color. Sophie held up a paper bag. I brought bread to feed the ducks. Do you want to come? I'd love to. They walked toward the pond, Sophie running ahead while Marcus and Elena followed at a distance. The December air was cold but not brutal, just sharp enough to keep you alert. Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets, hyper-aware of Elena beside him. Thank you for coming. The words came out quieter than he'd intended. Thank you for calling. Elena watched Sophie scatter breadcrumbs at the water's edge. She looks like you. She has her mother's eyes. I know. I assumed. Elena glanced at him. I'm sorry, that must have been awful. It was. Still is sometimes. Marcus surprised himself with the honesty. Jennifer and I were high school sweethearts. Got married young, had Sophie right away. When she got sick, it felt like the universe was punishing me for being too happy, too early. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, my mother died when I was 12. Car accident. Black ice on Route 2. I spent years being angry at the universe too. I'm sorry, it was a long time ago, but her voice carried old pain. My father remarried 4 years later. I hated my stepmother at first, Catherine. Thought she was trying to replace my mom, but she was patient with me. Eventually, I realized she wasn't replacing anyone, just adding something new. Marcus understood the implication. Is that what you think you'd be doing with Sophie? I don't know what I'd be doing. Elena's vulnerability showed through the careful control. I've never been a mother, never been around children much, honestly. I'm terrified I'll mess this up, that Sophie will hate me, that I'll prove Bradford right, that I'm incomplete, that I can't do this. You're not incomplete. Try telling my parents that. Bitterness crept into her tone. Actually, don't. They'd probably agree with him. Sophie ran back toward them, eyes bright. There's a really fat duck. Come see. She grabbed Elena's hand without hesitation, pulling her toward the water. Elena let herself be led, glancing back at Marcus with an expression that might have been panic or might have been joy. He followed, watching his daughter and this stranger who wanted to be part of their lives. The duck was indeed fat, puffed up against the cold. Sophie named him Duke because he looked fancy, insisted on giving him extra bread, despite Marcus's reminder about feeding wildlife. Elena laughed at something Sophie said, genuine laughter, not the polite sound adults made around children they didn't really like. They stayed at the park for 2 hours. Sophie showed Elena her sketchbook, the drawings she'd been working on. Animals, mostly, with some portraits of Marcus that were surprisingly accurate for a second grader. Elena praised her technique, asked questions that showed she was actually looking at the art instead of just being polite. When Sophie asked if Elena could draw, Elena admitted she was terrible at it. Sophie immediately offered to teach her, explaining principles of shading and perspective that seemed advanced for her age. They sat on a bench, Sophie's serious face focused on correcting Elena's rabbit that looked more like a deformed potato, while Marcus stood nearby and watched his life potentially transform. Finally, Sophie's fingers got too cold to hold the pencil properly. Can we go home? I'm freezing. Of course. Marcus turned to Elena, unsure how to end this. Inviting her to their house felt like crossing a line, making this more real than he was ready for. Do you want to? He stopped. Elena waited. Come over. She finished for him, if that's okay with Sophie. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. You can see my room. I have like 100 drawings on my wall. Probably closer to 50. Marcus corrected, but he was smiling. Okay, follow us. The drive back to Somerville felt surreal. Marcus kept glancing in the rearview mirror, seeing Elena's Tesla behind his decade-old Honda Civic. The contrast couldn't be more stark, his life versus hers, poverty versus wealth. But she'd chosen to follow anyway. His rental house looked shabbier than usual through what he imagined were Elena's eyes. One-story ranch gray siding that needed repainting, small front yard with grass he kept trimmed but couldn't make lush. Inside, furniture bought, used on Craigslist, carpet worn in high-traffic areas, walls decorated with Sophie's artwork because he couldn't afford anything else. Elena stepped inside and didn't flinch. Just looked around with genuine interest, studying the photos on the mantel. Sophie at various ages. A few of Jennifer and Marcus from before, back when they'd been young and in love and thought they had forever. She was beautiful. Elena spoke softly, looking at a wedding photo. Marcus's throat tightened. Yeah, she was. Sophie grabbed Elena's hand again, familiar now in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. Come see my room. The house was small enough that Sophie's room was visible from the living room, a converted office barely big enough for a twin bed and dresser. But Sophie had made it her kingdom. Drawings covered every surface, walls, dresser taped to the closet door. A rainbow explosion of color and creativity. Elena stood in the doorway, taking it all in. Wow, I like to draw. Sophie's pride was obvious. I can see that. These are incredible. You have real talent. My teacher says I should take art classes, but they're expensive. Marcus winced. He'd explained that private instruction cost money they didn't have, but Sophie had internalized it as him not valuing her enough to invest. Elena knelt to Sophie's eye level. Have you ever tried watercolors? No. Are they fun? They can be. They're also tricky, but I bet you'd be amazing at them. She glanced up at Marcus. My stepmother teaches watercolor classes at the Museum of Fine Arts. For kids. If you're interested, I could ask about enrollment. Elena, I'm not offering to pay, just offering to ask about it. Whether you enroll Sophie is up to you. The careful phrasing, not imposing. Just providing information. Marcus found himself nodding. They stayed for an hour. Elena sat on Sophie's floor, letting a 7-year-old teach her how to draw. Her rabbit looked catastrophically bad, which made Sophie laugh until she couldn't breathe. Marcus stood in the doorway watching, feeling something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 6 years. When Elena finally said she needed to leave, Sophie hugged her. Not a quick, polite hug, a real one, arms wrapped tight, head against Elena's stomach. Can you come back? Elena looked at Marcus, question in her eyes. He nodded. If your dad says it's okay, I'd love to come back. Daddy, yeah, sweetheart. She can come back. After Elena left, after Sophie went to bed, still talking excitedly about her new friend, who couldn't draw, Marcus sat alone in the living room. His phone buzzed. Thank you for today. Sophie is wonderful. You're doing an amazing job raising her. Marcus stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you for coming. She really liked you. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, and appeared again. I really liked her too. And you. A pause then. Would it be okay if I came back next Saturday? Yes, that would be okay. Good. See you then. Marcus set down his phone and let himself feel it, the dangerous, terrifying thing he'd been trying to avoid. Hope that this insane idea might actually work, that Elena might become part of their lives, that Sophie might finally have what she'd been asking for, that Marcus might not have to do this alone anymore. He pulled out his laptop and opened the prenup Elena had given him, read through it carefully this time, analyzing terms with his accountant's eye. It was fair, generous even, protected both parties while providing significant security for Sophie. Education fully funded, healthcare covered, dissolution terms that didn't leave anyone destroyed financially. It was the foundation for a partnership. Not romance, not passion, not the kind of love he'd had with Jennifer, but maybe something else, something practical that could grow into something real if they gave it time and effort. His phone rang. Rachel, I'm calling because I have excellent instincts and I know you're overthinking something. Spill. Marcus told her about the park, about Sophie's instant connection with Elena, about the hour in his house where a stranger had sat on his daughter's floor and genuinely engaged with her art. So what's the problem? The problem is I'm terrified. What if this doesn't work? What if Sophie gets attached and Elena decides it's too hard? What if it does work? Rachel's voice gentled. What if you finally get to stop carrying everything alone? What if Sophie gets a mother and you get a partner and your life becomes easier instead of harder? That seems too good to be true, because you've trained yourself to expect failure. Jennifer died and you decided that was your fault, somehow that you don't deserve happiness anymore. But that's bullshit, Marcus. You deserve good things. Sophie deserves good things. And maybe Elena is offering exactly what you both need. She's rich, I'm not. Her parents are going to hate me. Probably. So what? You're not marrying her parents. You're marrying her if you decide to do this. And she seems pretty clear about choosing you over their approval. I haven't decided anything yet. Yes, you have. Rachel's lawyer voice emerged confident in her reading of evidence. You've already decided you're going to try this. You're just working up the courage to admit it to yourself. After they hung up, Marcus sat in the quiet of his house. Around him, evidence of the life he'd built alone, Sophie's drawings, Jennifer's photo furniture carefully maintained despite being secondhand. A small life, a limited life. But his. Except it wasn't enough anymore. Sophie needed more. Deserved more. And maybe possibly Elena Hartwell could provide it. He pulled up her contact, typed out a message. Can we meet this week, just the two of us? I want to talk about this seriously, about what it would actually look like if we did this. Her response came within seconds. Tuesday night. There's a coffee place in Harvard Square, Cafe Algiers. 7 p.m. I'll be there. Marcus set down his phone and let himself breathe. He was really doing this. Considering marriage to a woman he'd met once, spoken to twice, who'd spent exactly one afternoon with his daughter. It was insane. But maybe insane was exactly what his situation required. Maybe traditional approaches had failed because his life wasn't traditional. Maybe the universe was offering him an unconventional solution to an impossible problem, and walking away from it would be the actual mistake. He'd know more Tuesday. After they talked like adults about expectations and boundaries and what partnership actually meant when you built it on foundation of mutual need rather than organic connection. He'd know if Elena Hartwell was serious about this insane proposal, if she'd thought through the reality of what she was offering, if she understood that marrying him meant signing up for school pickups and art projects in a 7-year-old who would need her in ways that couldn't be scheduled or controlled. Tuesday would tell him if this was real or just a beautiful mistake waiting to happen. Tuesday night, Marcus arrived at Cafe Algiers 15 minutes early. The narrow space smelled like cardboard and coffee grounds, its walls covered in faded photographs of writers who'd supposedly frequented the place decades ago. He chose a table in the back corner where they could talk without being overheard. Elena walked in exactly at 7 wearing business casual that suggested she'd come straight from work. She ordered mint tea without asking what he wanted, slid into the chair across from him, with the efficiency of someone who treated every meeting like a board presentation. Let's be direct, she pulled out a leather portfolio. I've drafted a more detailed agreement. Not legal yet, we'd need actual lawyers for that. But I want us to be completely clear about expectations before we go further. Marcus appreciated the bluntness. No pretense of this being a romantic coffee date, no dancing around the transactional reality of what they were discussing. She opened the portfolio to reveal a typed document, probably 10 pages. Living arrangements. I'm proposing we maintain separate residences initially. You and Sophie stay where you are. I stay in Seaport. We spend structured time together, weekends, some weeknights, and see how it goes for 6 months. If it's working, we consolidate households. If it's not, we dissolve the arrangement before making it legal. Smart. Marcus scanned the page. No commitment until we're sure Sophie's okay with this. Exactly. Elena's finger traced down to the next section. Finances remain separate except for shared expenses related to Sophie education, healthcare activities. I contribute proportionally based on income differential, but you maintain control over decisions regarding her care. I'm not comfortable with you paying for everything. I'm not asking you to be comfortable. I'm asking you to be practical. Her tone sharpened, then softened. Marcus, your salary is roughly $60,000 a year. Mine is substantially higher. If we're partners, we pool resources strategically. You bring expertise in financial analysis, emotional intelligence, parenting experience. I bring capital and professional connections. That's how partnerships work. The logic was sound even if it stung his pride. What about your parents? Elena's jaw tightened. We'll deal with them when necessary, but I need you to understand something. They will hate you. Not because of who you are, but because you represent everything they think I should have avoided. They'll say terrible things, make assumptions, try to break us apart. And you're okay with that. I haven't spoken to them in 3 years except for mandatory holiday appearances. Their approval stopped mattering when they told me I was defective for not producing grandchildren on their timeline. She met his eyes directly. If you need me to choose between you and them, I'm choosing you. But you need to be prepared for what that choice costs. They talked for 2 hours, covered everything from discipline, philosophy for Sophie, to what happens if either of them meets someone else from Division of Household Labor, to how they'd handle it if the arrangement genuinely failed. Elena had thought through scenarios Marcus hadn't considered backup plans for complications he hadn't imagined. By 9 p.m., they'd outlined something that almost made sense. A partnership built on mutual need with clear boundaries and exit strategies designed to give Sophie stability while protecting both adults from catastrophic loss. One more thing. Marcus closed the portfolio. If we do this, I need you to promise you won't hurt her. Sophie, I mean, if you're going to bail, do it now before she gets attached. I'm already attached. Elena's mask slipped. I spent one afternoon with your daughter and I haven't stopped thinking about her. About teaching her watercolors, watching her draw, hearing her laugh. I want this to work, Marcus. Not just for practical reasons, because I genuinely want to be part of her life. The vulnerability in her voice decided it for him. Okay, let's try this. 6 months like you said. Structured visits, see how it goes. If Sophie's happy and we're functioning as a unit, we make it official. Elena's hand reached across the table, found his. Her grip was warm, steady. Thank you for taking a chance on this. Thank you for being crazy enough to ask. The next 8 Saturdays blurred into a pattern that started feeling like family. Elena arrived at 10 dressed in increasingly casual clothes, jeans and sweaters replacing the business armor, hair loose instead of controlled. Sometimes they went to parks, other times museums Sophie loved. The aquarium where Sophie pressed her face against glass and named every fish. The science museum where Elena and Sophie built structures in the engineering exhibit, while Marcus watched them collaborate with growing ease. Ice skating at Boston Commons Frog Pond became Sophie's favorite. Elena couldn't skate, kept falling, clutching the wall like it was the only thing preventing death. Sophie found this hilarious, insisted on teaching her the way she'd taught drawing. Marcus and Sophie each took one of Elena's hands, pulling her around the rink while she wobbled and laughed and swore she was going to break something. When Elena finally managed 3 consecutive strides without falling, Sophie cheered like Elena had won Olympic gold. Elena's smile, pure joy, unguarded, made Marcus's heart skip in a way he hadn't felt in 6 years. After when Sophie ran ahead to the hot chocolate stand, Elena's gloved hand brushed his. Thank you for this, for letting me be part of it. Her breath emerged in white clouds. I haven't been this happy in longer than I can remember. Marcus looked at her, saw, past the CEO to the lonely woman underneath who just wanted to belong somewhere. Me either. Their hands stayed touching through winter gloves, barely contact at all. But it felt like a promise neither of them was ready to speak aloud. Another Saturday they attempted baking cookies. Elena admitted she'd never baked anything in her life. Her family had always employed a chef. Marcus walked her through the recipe Jennifer used to make the one printed on the chocolate chip bag. They measured ingredients wrong, forgot timers, ended up with cookies charred on edges and raw in the middle. Sophie thought it was the funniest thing she'd ever witnessed. Elena laughed until tears streamed down her face. Marcus ordered pizza and felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd built crumbling, brick by brick. The evening Sophie got sick changed everything. Tuesday in early March. Marcus got the call from school. Sophie had a fever, needed to be picked up immediately. He left work early, brought her home, watched her temperature climb to 102. Small body curled on the couch, face flushed, complaining that everything hurt. He texted Elena without overthinking it. Sophie's sick, can't make Saturday. Her response came within minutes. I can come help. You don't have to do that. You have work. I'm the CEO. I can work from anywhere. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Marcus should have said no. This wasn't part of their arrangement. Elena wasn't obligated to play nurse to his sick kid, but he was exhausted, worried, and the thought of not handling this alone was too tempting to resist. Elena arrived with soup from a restaurant in Cambridge, Medicine, Sophie actually liked, and a stuffed animal Marcus hadn't asked her to bring. She sat with Sophie while Marcus tried to work from his laptop at the kitchen table, answering emails he couldn't focus on. At some point, Marcus looked up to find Sophie asleep on the couch, head in Elena's lap. Elena had her laptop balanced precariously on the arm, typing one-handed while the other stroked Sophie's hair. She glanced up, saw Marcus watching, smiled. Something inside Marcus broke open. Or maybe healed. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. That evening, after Sophie's fever broke and she was sleeping peacefully in her room, Marcus and Elena sat at his kitchen table with coffee. Neither of them drank. "Can I ask you something?" Elena's voice was quiet. "Sure." "Do you think about her when I'm here?" Your wife Marcus had known this question would come eventually. Didn't make it easier to answer. "Yes," Elena nodded, accepting. "Does it bother you that I'm here?" "Sometimes." Honesty felt important. "Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying her, like I'm trying to replace her." "You can't replace someone who was loved." Elena's hand covered his on the table. "Love doesn't work that way. My head knows that. My heart isn't always convinced." Elena was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "My mother died when I was 12. Car accident on Route 2 black ice. She went off the road, died instantly. Marcus hadn't known the details. I'm sorry, my father was devastated. For 3 years, he barely functioned. Then he met Catherine, my stepmother. I hated her at first. Screamed at my father that he was betraying my mother. Said horrible things to Catherine's face. What changed one night, I found Catherine crying in the kitchen. I asked why. She said, because I'll never be your mother, and I wish I could be. Not to replace her, no one could, but to love you the way she would have wanted." Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I realized Catherine wasn't trying to erase my mother. She was just trying to add new love to the space my mother left behind. That's what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to be Jennifer. I couldn't be even if I wanted to. I'm just trying to be part of your lives, if you'll let me." Marcus's throat was too tight to speak. He nodded instead. "I need you to know something." Elena's voice dropped lower. "This started as a practical arrangement, a transaction. But it's not that anymore, not for me. What is it? I'm falling in love with Sophie." She took a shaky breath. "And I think I'm falling in love with you too." The world seemed to stop. Marcus stared at her, this woman who'd walked into his life 2 months ago with an insane proposal, who'd met his daughter and baked terrible cookies and learned to ice skate, who'd somehow become essential. This wasn't supposed to happen. His voice came out raw. "I know. We were supposed to keep it practical, transactional." "I know, but I can't." Marcus's voice broke. "I can't keep it practical anymore because somewhere along the way I started falling for you too." Elena's breath caught. "Really? Really? You're brilliant and kind and terrible at drawing. You make Sophie laugh. You make me feel like maybe I don't have to carry everything alone. And that terrifies me. It terrifies me too." Elena came around the table. Marcus stood to meet her. They faced each other across 3 feet of kitchen linoleum, across the gulf of everything that separated them, wealth and poverty, her future and his past. Then Elena closed the distance and Marcus met her halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative tasting of coffee and possibility. Elena's hand came up to cup his face and Marcus pulled her closer, feeling her warmth against him. It wasn't passionate or desperate. It was gentle, careful, the kiss of two people who'd been lonely too long and were terrified of breaking something precious. When they pulled apart, both were trembling. "What do we do now?" Elena whispered. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." She rested her forehead against his. "Me too." 2 weeks later, Elena brought up meeting her parents. They were at Marcus's house, Sophie occupied with watercolor supplies Catherine had sent over as a gift. Marcus and Elena sat at the kitchen table, and he watched her steel herself for the conversation. "I think it's time you and Sophie met my parents." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No. But we can't avoid them forever. If this is going to work, really work, they need to know about you." "What have you told them? That I'm seeing someone? That it's serious?" Elena's jaw tightened. "I haven't mentioned Sophie yet." Warning bells clanged in Marcus's head. "Why not? I wanted them to meet you both first, to see how good this is before they start judging." Judging? Marcus's voice went flat. "Elena, what aren't you telling me?" She looked away. "My parents have certain expectations. They won't understand at first, but once they see us together, how happy I am, they'll come around." Will they? Marcus heard the bitterness in his own voice. I'm a mid-level accountant who rents a house in Somerville and raises someone else's kid. What exactly is there for them to understand? Don't, Elena's tone sharpened. Don't diminish yourself. I'm not. I'm being realistic about how they'll see me. He leaned back. You grew up in a mansion in Back Bay. I grew up sharing a bedroom with my sister in Quincy. We're from different worlds, Elena. I don't care what world you're from. But your parents will. Elena's silence was answer enough. When Friday night, dinner at their house, she reached for his hand. I'll be right there. I won't let them hurt you or Sophie. It was a promise she couldn't keep, and they both knew it. Friday arrived with the weight of execution day. Marcus, dressed in his interview suit again, helped Sophie into the navy dress they'd bought at Target, the nicest thing she owned. She looked so small and vulnerable that Marcus almost called the whole thing off. But Elena was already on her way. Too late to back out now. They drove to Back Bay, following Elena's Tesla through streets that became progressively more expensive. Past brownstones and tree-lined avenues, past buildings Marcus couldn't afford to look at. Finally stopping in front of a 3-story federal-style mansion that probably cost more than Marcus would earn in his entire life. Sophie pressed her face to the window. Daddy, is this a palace? No, sweetheart. Just a very big house where Elena grew up. She lives here. She has her own place now. Sophie absorbed this, trying to reconcile the Elena who sat on their floor drawing with the Elena who came from this world. Elena met them at the door looking nervous in a way Marcus had never seen. She wore a dress he had also never seen, silk and probably designer, transforming her back into the CEO who'd first approached him. Her armor was on protection against whatever was coming. Ready. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. No, but let's do this anyway. They climbed the steps. Elena's hand found his squeezed once. The door opened. Catherine Hartwell stood there, blonde hair in a perfect bob, Chanel suit, pearls that cost more than Marcus's car. Her gaze swept over Marcus and Sophie with clinical precision, assessing, calculating, finding them wanting. Welcome, the word was ice. Please come in. Marcus took Sophie's hand and stepped into a world where they would never belong. The foyer swallowed them, white Carrara marble baccarat chandelier silence so complete it felt hostile. Sophie's Target shoes squeaked against stone, announcing their inadequacy. Robert Hartwell emerged from what looked like a library. Silver hair, Tom Ford suit, handshake that measured worth in seconds. Marcus Chen, no warmth in his voice. And this must be Sophie. Sophie extended her small hand. Nice to meet you, sir. Robert's eyebrow rose fractionally. At least she had manners. They moved to the dining room. Table that could seat 12, set for 5, with china so delicate Marcus was afraid to breathe near it. Catherine poured wine without asking. Preferences seated them strategically. Marcus and Elena separated Sophie between strangers. The first course arrived. Caviar on blini. Sophie looked at the glistening black eggs with barely concealed horror, took a small bite, kept her face carefully neutral, even as Marcus knew she hated it. 7 years old and already learning to lie with her expression. That broke something in him. Robert started the interrogation disguised as small talk. Marcus, Elena mentioned you're an accountant. Yes, Morrison and Associates. We handle mid-market audits and forensic accounting. Morrison. Robert swirled his wine. I don't believe I'm familiar. Are they a national firm, regional? Based in Boston, offices in Providence and Hartford? I see, the words dripped with dismissal. What did you study? Accounting and finance. UMass Boston. Full scholarship, graduated magna cum laude. Impressive. Catherine's tone suggested it wasn't. And you're raising Sophie alone. The shift was jarring from Marcus's inadequacies to Sophie's existence as a problem. Yes, my wife passed away 6 years ago. How tragic. No emotion behind the words. Catherine turned to Sophie. And how old are you, dear? Sophie swallowed her water carefully. 7 3/4. 7. Such a formative age. Catherine's smile was surgical. You must need so much. Stability, structure, a proper family unit. Marcus's jaw clenched. She has those things. Does she? Catherine's voice softened into something worse than anger. A single father working full-time, no mother in the picture. That seems like a challenging environment for a young girl. Father Elena's voice cut through sharp. Sophie is thriving. She's talented, intelligent. I'm not questioning the child's abilities. Robert's interruption was smooth. I'm questioning whether one parent working a demanding job with limited resources can provide everything a child needs. The accusation hung in the air. Marcus felt Sophie shrink beside him, absorbing the subtext that she was the problem, that her existence made him insufficient. The second course arrived. Lobster bisque. Marcus had lost his appetite for somewhere between the caviar and being told he was failing his daughter. Catherine pivoted with predatory grace. Marcus, what are your career prospects? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm being considered for senior accountant. Partner track in 3 to 5 years if I continue on my current trajectory. Partner, Robert's laugh was brief cutting. What does that translate to in compensation? Father Elena's voice rose. It's a fair question. Robert turned back to Marcus, all pretense of politeness abandoned. Elena is worth conservatively $30 million. Her company is valued at $65 million. You understand our concern about intentions. The accusation landed like a slap. Marcus set down his spoon with deliberate care. I'm aware of the disparity, Mr. Hartwell. I didn't pursue Elena. She approached me. How convenient for you. Father, that's enough, is it? Catherine's voice was quieter but no less lethal. We've worked very hard to build our family's position, Elena. Your success is something we're enormously proud of. But you have to understand our perspective. A man with a modest job and a child from a previous marriage approaching our daughter. He didn't approach me. I approached him. Elena's words came out clipped. And Marcus has never asked me for anything. Not money, not connections, not help. He's been raising Sophie alone for 6 years, doing everything himself. Your best is admirable, Catherine turned to Marcus. But Elena deserves more than admirable. She deserves exceptional. Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. The sound cut through tension like breaking glass. She stared at her hands, tears building. Marcus pushed back from the table. Sophie, get your coat. Marcus, please, Elena reached for him. No. The word came out harder than he intended. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have brought her here. He stood, helped Sophie out of her chair. She was crying silently now, tears streaming down her face. Catherine opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus cut her off. My daughter is crying because you just spent the last hour telling her she's a burden, that her existence makes me inadequate, that she's the reason I can't be with Elena. His voice was controlled, lethal. We're leaving. Elena followed them to the foyer. Marcus, wait. Let me talk to them. They just need time. Time for what? To accept that I'm poor, that Sophie isn't their blood. He grabbed their coats from where uniformed staff had hung them. They made their position very clear. They're just protective. They're cruel. Marcus looked at her, saw the woman he'd been falling for overlaid with this world she came from. And you brought us here, knowing they would be. You knew they'd judge us, and you brought Sophie anyway. Elena's face crumpled. I thought they'd be different. I thought if they saw, you saw how good you are. Well, they saw. He finished buttoning Sophie's coat with shaking hands. And we're not good enough. We'll never be good enough for your world. From the dining room, Robert's voice carried, Elena, come back inside. Let them go. Elena looked torn between two worlds. Marcus made the decision for her. Goodbye, Elena. He walked out, Sophie's hand in his, leaving Elena standing alone in her parents' mansion. In the car, Sophie sobbed against her seatbelt, small body shaking with the kind of crying that came from somewhere deeper than disappointment. Marcus pulled to the side of Beacon Street, unable to drive, while his daughter fell apart beside him. He climbed into the back seat, pulled her into his arms. They hate me. Her voice came out, broken, muffled against his shirt. They think I make you bad. They don't hate you. They don't even know you. But they said you can't give me good things. That I make everything wrong. They're wrong, so wrong, Sophie. He held her tighter, feeling her tears soak through fabric to skin. You are the best thing in my life. You make everything right. But even as he said it, doubt crept in like poison. Maybe the Hartwells were right. Maybe Sophie would be better off with a father who could provide more, who wasn't stretched so thin he could barely hold it together. Maybe loving her wasn't enough when love couldn't pay for art classes or college or the future she deserved. The drive home passed in silence, broken only by Sophie's occasional hiccuping breath. She fell asleep against the window somewhere near Somerville, exhausted from tears. Marcus carried her inside, tucked her into bed, without changing her out of the dress that had been supposed to make her look nice enough for people who would never think anything was nice enough. She stirred briefly, eyes opening halfway. Is Elena gone? His throat closed around words he didn't want to speak. Yeah, sweetheart, she's gone. Forever, I don't know. Sophie turned toward the wall, pulled her rabbit close, retreated into the only safety she understood. Unconsciousness, where nothing could hurt her. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out, then retreated to the living room. Sat on the floor in the dark because sitting on furniture felt like too much effort, like his body had forgotten how to function in normal ways. His phone lit up with Elena's calls. He declined them all. Text messages piled up, apologies, explanations, pleas to talk. He deleted them without reading past the first lines because reading meant processing, and processing meant feeling, and he couldn't feel anything right now except the weight of failure pressing down until he couldn't breathe. At 2 in the morning, still on the floor, his phone rang. Rachel, he answered because ignoring her only made her more persistent, and she had a key to his house and would show up in person if he didn't pick up. I've been calling for hours. What happened? Marcus told her every humiliating moment. Catherine's Ice Roberts' interrogation, the systematic dismantling of his worth in front of his daughter. When he finished, Rachel was quiet for so long, he thought she'd hung up. Finally, in a voice that carried more anger than he'd heard from her in years, "You're an idiot." "Thanks. Really helpful. I'm serious, Marcus. You're being an idiot." Her lawyer voice emerged sharp and unforgiving. "Those people were horrible." "Agreed. They insulted you and Sophie. Absolutely unacceptable. So you left." "Good. Necessary. Then why am I an idiot? Because you're not just running from them. You're running from Elena. You're using this as an excuse to bail on the relationship before you get hurt worse." Rachel's tone softened fractionally. "Marcus, when Jenny was dying, what did she make you promise?" His hands clenched around the phone. "I don't want to talk about Jennifer." "Too bad. What did she make you promise?" The memory surfaced unwillingly. Jennifer in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors, and the smell that meant death was close, taking his hand with what little strength remained, making him swear. "She made me promise to be happy." His voice cracked. "To not let her death make me afraid to live. And what are you doing right now?" "That's different." "Is it? You found someone who loves you, who loves Sophie? The first time it got hard, you ran." Rachel's voice turned fierce. "You think Jenny would want this? You think she'd want you teaching Sophie that when things get tough, you quit? I'm protecting Sophie. You're protecting her. You're protecting yourself. Sophie doesn't need you to shield her from rejection. She needs you to show her how to stand up to it, how to fight for what matters." She paused, let the words land. "You think honoring Jenny means staying miserable? You're wrong. Honoring her means being brave enough to choose happiness, like she did fighting for every day she had left with you." After Rachel hung up, Marcus sat in the silence of his house. Around him, evidence of the life he'd built alone, Sophie's drawings on walls, Jennifer's photo on the mantel furniture, bought secondhand but kept carefully maintained. A small life, a controlled life, safe, except it wasn't enough anymore. Sophie needed more than safety. She needed someone to fight for her, to show her that rejection didn't define worth, that other people's judgment didn't determine value. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through Elena's messages. The first few were apologetic, then confused, then hurt. The last one sent an hour ago, "I understand if you don't want to see me again. But please don't punish Sophie for my parents' mistakes. She deserves better than losing someone else she loves." Marcus stared at the words until they blurred. Sophie had lost her mother at 14 months old. Now she'd lost Elena because Marcus was too proud and too scared to fight for them. Rachel was right. He was teaching his daughter the wrong lesson entirely. Morning came with exhausted clarity. Marcus found Sophie already awake, sitting at the kitchen table without breakfast, her sketchbook open, but blank. She didn't look up when he entered. "Sophie, sweetheart, I need to talk to you." She stayed quiet, small shoulders hunched defensively. Marcus sat across from her, choosing words carefully. "I made a big mistake last night. When those people said mean things, I ran away. I thought I was protecting you." Sophie's eyes remained fixed on the empty page. "But running away taught you the wrong lesson. It taught you that when things get hard, we give up. That when people say we're not good enough, we believe them." He reached across the table, waited until she looked at him. "That's not what I want you to learn." Sophie's voice came out small, wounded. What should I learn that being good enough isn't about money or big houses? It's about being kind and honest and loving. His voice steadied. And Sophie, you are all those things. You're smart and talented and compassionate. You're everything I could want in a daughter. Anyone who can't see that is wrong. What about Elena's parents? They're wrong. They don't know you. They saw you for an hour and made judgments based on things that don't matter. Marcus squeezed her hand, but we can't let them win by believing what they said. Sophie processed this with 7-year-old logic that cut through adult complications. So we should show them they're wrong. Do you want to, even if it's hard, even if they keep being mean? Her chin lifted, showing the stubborn determination she'd inherited from Jennifer. Yes, I want Elena back. I don't care about her mean parents. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. His daughter was braver than he was. Then we'll fight for her, together. Promise, I promise. The words hung between them like a covenant. Sophie's hand found his across the table, small fingers wrapping around his thumb, the way they had when she was a toddler, learning to walk, trusting him to keep her steady while she figured out balance. Marcus called Elena that afternoon after he dropped Sophie at school and sat in the parking lot gathering courage like armor. She answered on the first ring, voice raw. Marcus, can we meet just the two of us? I need to talk to you. Yes. Where your office? I don't want Sophie to see us until we figure this out. 30 minutes later, Marcus stood in the lobby of Technova Solutions, feeling profoundly out of place among glass and chrome and people in expensive suits. The receptionist called up, and Elena appeared almost immediately, looking terrible in a way that made his heart ache. Dark circles, hair pulled back severely, armor back in place, but failing to hide the damage underneath. They didn't hug, didn't touch, just stood in the lobby while employees pretended not to stare. I'm sorry, Marcus's voice was low. I shouldn't have left like that. I was angry, but I took it out on you. Elena's composure cracked. They were horrible. I knew they might be judgmental, but I didn't think I never imagined they'd be that cruel to Sophie. They're your parents. You wanted them to accept us. I wanted them to see what I see. Elena's eyes filled. That you're a good man. That Sophie is wonderful. That we could be a family. Her voice broke. I told them off after you left. Told them they were wrong about everything. My father said I was throwing away my future. My mother said I was choosing a stranger over my family. What did you say? I said you weren't a stranger. That in 3 months you and Sophie had become more family to me than they'd been in years. Elena's voice dropped to barely audible. Then I left. Haven't spoken to them since. Marcus absorbed this, recalibrating everything. Elena had chosen them, had stood up to her parents, walked away from that world, and he'd pushed her away without giving her a chance to prove her choice. I'm scared. The admission cost him, scared that your parents are right, that I can't give you what you deserve, that Sophie will grow up in your world always being reminded she doesn't belong. So we let them win. We give up because they're terrible people. No, Marcus stepped closer. We fight. But I need to know you're in this, really in this, not just rebelling against your parents, not looking for a family because they rejected you. I need to know you love Sophie and me enough to face judgment every holiday, every family event, enough to choose us over and over. Elena closed the distance between them, voice fierce with certainty. I love Sophie. I've loved her since that first day at the park when she taught me to feed ducks. I love her laugh and her drawings and the way she explains things with complete confidence, even when she's wrong. Her hands found his. And I love you. I love how you make pancakes on Saturday morning and read her stories with different voices and work yourself exhausted to give her everything you can. I love your integrity and your kindness and how you see me as a person, not a bank account. She held his gaze. My parents will never accept us. You need to understand that. They'll make every interaction difficult, every holiday a battle. Then they'll lose you. Because I'm choosing you. Elena's grip tightened. I'm choosing Sophie. I'm choosing this family we're building. I don't care what they think. Marcus pulled her against him, felt her shake with tears, or relief, or both. Around them, the Technova lobby buzzed with activity that faded to background noise. Just them holding each other, making promises in the wreckage of what they'd almost lost. Come home, he whispered against her hair. To us, where you belong. Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes. Can I? After everything, Sophie wants you back. She told me this morning she wants to fight for you. Marcus managed a smile. Turns out my 7-year-old is braver than I am. She gets that from you. No, she gets it from her mother. His throat tightened. Jennifer would have fought your parents, would have told them exactly what she thought. I think she'd like you. I think she'd be glad Sophie has you. Elena kissed him then, soft and certain tasting of salt in promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling through tears. Take me home, Marcus, to my family. 3 weeks of silence from the Hartwells. Elena had expected calls, confrontations, the pressure her parents typically applied when she made decisions they disapproved of. Instead, nothing. Radio silence more unnerving than conflict. She filled the void with Marcus and Sophie. Saturdays became assumed, but other nights crept in. Dinner on Wednesdays, homework help on Thursdays. Elena's penthouse in Seaport gathered dust, while she spent evenings in Marcus's cramped living room teaching Sophie watercolor techniques Catherine had taught her decades ago. The parallels weren't lost on her. Her stepmother had earned Elena's trust through patient presence, showing up week after week until Elena stopped flinching at affection. Now Elena was doing the same with Sophie, learning that motherhood wasn't biology, but consistency. On a Tuesday in late March, Elena's phone rang during a product demo with potential clients in New York. She glanced at the screen, mother, and declined the call. 15 seconds later, it rang again. Then again. Elena excused herself from the video conference, stepped into her private office. What Catherine's voice came through, clipped and controlled. Your father and I would like to see you. And Marcus and Sophie. Her name is Sophie. We'd like to see all of you. This Saturday, Neutral Ground Cafe Malene in Harvard Square. 2 p.m. Elena's instinct screamed trap. Why? Because you're our daughter. Because you clearly intend to continue this relationship despite our concerns. A pause waited with something Elena couldn't identify. Because we'd like to try again. Properly. The word caught Elena off guard. Properly. As if the dinner had been a failed first draft, not a calculated attack. I need to talk to Marcus. Of course, let me know by Thursday. The line went dead before Elena could respond. She called Marcus from her office, explained the situation. His immediate response was exactly what she expected. No. They had their chance. They used it to make Sophie cry. I'm not putting her through that again. What if they've changed their minds? Even as Elena said it, doubt crept in. What if they actually want to try? People like your parents don't change in 3 weeks. The certainty in his voice stung because it mirrored her own suspicions. But underneath ran a thread of something else, hope she didn't want to acknowledge. Hope that her parents might see what she saw. That family didn't require choosing between the man she loved and the people who raised her. 1 hour. Public place. The moment they say anything cruel, we leave. Elena's throat tightened. I need to try Marcus. They're still my parents. Silence stretched on Marcus's end. Finally, 1 hour. But I'm asking Sophie first. If she doesn't want to go, we don't go. Sophie surprised them both. When Marcus explained the situation that evening, carefully emphasizing it was her choice, Sophie's response was immediate. Can we go? You don't have to, sweetheart. After what they said, I know. Sophie set down her colored pencil, met her father's eyes with disturbing maturity. But you said we should show them they're wrong. We can't do that if we never see them. Marcus looked at Elena, who'd stayed for dinner, and was now witnessing his daughter be braver than both adults combined. You're sure? Yes. Besides, Elena will be there. And you? Sophie's voice carried absolute trust. I'm not scared if you're both there. Saturday arrived with the inevitability of Judgment Day. Marcus wore his interview suit again, the armor he'd worn to both disasters. Elena wore designer jeans and a silk blouse, compromised between her world and his. Sophie had picked her own outfit, purple dress, with leggings, the purple coat she loved. Battle gear in 7-year-old form. They drove separately to Harvard Square, meeting outside Cafe Malene. The cafe was aggressively neutral, exposed brick, reclaimed wood tables, the kind of place where professors graded papers while students pretended to study. Middle ground between Marcus's Somerville and Elena's Back Bay. Robert and Catherine were already seated at a corner table, dressed down in a way that felt calculated, but Elena chose to see his effort. Robert in slacks and a sweater, Catherine in an elegant pantsuit without the Chanel armor. Sophie walked between Marcus and Elena, holding both their hands. When they reached the table, she extended her hand to Catherine without prompting. Hello, Mrs. Hartwell. Thank you for inviting us. Catherine blinked clearly, not expecting formality from a child. She shook Sophie's hand, something flickering across her face that might have been surprise or might have been shame. Hello, Sophie. Thank you for coming. They sat. Elena positioned herself between Marcus and her parents' literal and metaphorical buffer. A waiter appeared immediately at Robert's world, where staff anticipated needs before they were voiced. They ordered coffee hot chocolate for Sophie with extra whipped cream. Catherine spoke first, words clearly rehearsed, but delivered with effort at sincerity. We wanted to apologize for our behavior at dinner. We were rude, judgmental, and unkind. Particularly to you, Sophie. That was inexcusable. Sophie looked at Marcus, seeking guidance. He gave a microscopic nod and accept the apology, but don't make it easy. Thank you for saying that. Sophie's voice was small but steady. It hurt my feelings when you said I made my daddy not good enough. Catherine's composure cracked, genuine pain crossing her face. I know, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Why did you think that Sophie's question carried no guile, just genuine confusion? My daddy takes care of me really good. He makes pancakes and helps with homework and reads stories. He's the best daddy. Robert cleared his throat and Marcus tensed, preparing for another attack. But Robert's voice when he spoke carried something unexpected: uncertainty. We didn't question your father's devotion, Sophie. We questioned whether one person, regardless of dedication, could provide everything a child needs. But I have two people now. Sophie gestured between Marcus and Elena. Elena helps too. She teaches me art and reads to me and makes me laugh. So I have everything I need. The simple logic of a child cutting through adult complications. Elena watched her parents absorb this, saw something shift in Catherine's expression. Not quite acceptance, but maybe the beginning of understanding. Marcus stayed quiet, letting Sophie speak for herself, but his hand found Elena's under the table. Squeezed once united front, even in silence. Robert leaned forward, and Marcus braced for condescension. Instead, Robert's tone carried genuine curiosity. Marcus, I was unnecessarily harsh about your financial situation. Elena has explained that you didn't pursue her, that this relationship began at her instigation. Does that matter? Marcus's tone was careful. Whether I pursued her or she pursued me, you still think I'm not good enough. I think Robert chose words with visible effort. I think I judged you by metrics that don't apply. You're not trying to access Elena's wealth. You haven't asked for anything. That's become clear. I don't want Elena's money. I want Elena. Then what happens when Sophie needs something you can't afford? Robert wasn't being cruel now, just pragmatic. College medical care opportunities that require resources you don't have. Pride doesn't pay tuition. The question landed like a blade. Marcus's jaw tightened and Elena opened her mouth to defend him. But he spoke first. You're right. The admission clearly surprised Robert. I can't afford private school or expensive art classes or Harvard. I'm doing the math every month trying to make sure Sophie has what she needs. And most months I come up short. His voice stayed level. But Sophie isn't learning that her worth is measured in dollars. She's learning that love means showing up, working hard, sacrificing. Those are lessons your money can't buy. Catherine's expression flickered pain. Maybe recognition. Money can't buy integrity. She spoke quietly. Agreed, but it can buy security, opportunity, access. Why should Sophie be denied those things because of pride? I'm not denying her anything. Aren't you? Catherine's voice softened in a way that was somehow worse than anger. Marcus, I need to tell you something. Something Elena doesn't know. Elena straightened. Mother, what I grew up in Southie. Catherine's words dropped like stones. My father was a plumber. My mother cleaned houses. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with my 3 siblings. I shared a bedroom until I was 16. The revelation silenced the table. Elena stared at her mother, processing information that contradicted everything she'd believed about her family's history. Robert was old Boston money, but Catherine, who obsessed over pedigree and status and belonging. I met your father at Boston University. Full scholarship, only way I could afford it. Catherine's hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. His family hated me, called me a gold digger, trailer trash trying to social climb. It took 10 years for them to accept me. 10 years of proving I belonged, that I wasn't using Robert, that I was good enough for their precious son. She looked directly at Marcus. When I saw you and Sophie at that dinner, I saw my younger self. And I became the people I spent years hating the people who told me I wasn't enough. Marcus absorbed this understanding, shifting. Catherine's cruelty hadn't come from inherent snobbery, but from trauma. She'd fought so hard to belong that she couldn't tolerate anyone threatening that belonging, including her daughter, choosing someone from the world Catherine had escaped. I'm sorry, Catherine's voice broke. I'm so sorry I did to you what was done to me. I'm sorry I made Sophie feel unwanted. I was wrong about everything. Sophie's hand found Catherine's across the table, the gesture instinctive, compassionate beyond her years. It's okay. My daddy says everybody makes mistakes. The important thing is fixing them. Catherine looked at this child she'd insulted, offering forgiveness without hesitation. Tears spilled over. You're very wise, Sophie. I know. Sophie's matter-of-fact response broke the tension. My teacher says I'm advanced for my grade. The moment of lightness snapped the cable of tension that had been strangling them all. Robert smiled, genuine, not corporate. What's your favorite subject? Sophie launched into an explanation of art class, showing Robert drawings she'd brought in her backpack just in case. He examined them with focus that surprised Elena, asking questions about technique and inspiration that Sophie answered with increasing enthusiasm. Catherine and Elena stepped away to the counter ostensibly for more coffee. Catherine touched her daughter's arm. I owe you an apology too. I've spent your whole life pushing you toward men I thought were suitable. Men from the right families, right schools, right circles. I never asked what you wanted. I wanted to be seen as more than a uterus and a trust fund. I know, Catherine's voice dropped, and Marcus sees you that way. So does Sophie, she paused. I watched how you are with her, how patient, how present. You're natural at this, Elena. You're going to be a wonderful mother. The words hit harder than they should have. Elena had spent years believing she'd failed at motherhood before even starting, because her body didn't cooperate. Hearing her mother, her complicated, damaged, difficult mother, say she'd be good at it anyway, cracked something open. I'm scared. The admission came out raw. What if I mess it up? What if Sophie realizes I'm not her real mother and resents me? You won't mess it up. Catherine's hand covered Elena's. And you are her real mother. Real is about showing up, not biology. My stepmother taught me that. Now I'm teaching you. They returned to the table where Robert was explaining venture capital to Sophie, who was listening with more politeness than comprehension. Marcus looked up at Elena, question in his eyes. Are we okay? She nodded. Not perfect, not fixed, but okay. A beginning. They stayed at the cafe for 2 hours. Conversation remained careful adults navigating around past damage. But Sophie's presence smoothed rough edges, her questions forcing honest answers that couldn't hide behind adult complications. When they finally stood to leave, Catherine pulled Sophie aside. Would you like to learn watercolors? Real classes at the Museum of Fine Arts. I teach a program for children on Saturday mornings. Sophie's eyes went wide. Really, you teach art? I do. Have for 15 years. It's my favorite thing. Catherine glanced at Marcus. If your father agrees, you could join my class. No charge. I'd love to have you. Marcus's pride warred with practicality. Free art classes from the Museum of Fine Arts taught by his daughter's grandmother-to-be. His instinct screamed to refuse to insist he'd find a way to pay. But Sophie's expression, hope and excitement and longing made the decision for him. That's very generous. Thank you. Sophie hugged Catherine spontaneously, fiercely. Thank you, Grandma Catherine. The title hung in the air and Catherine's face crumpled into tears she didn't try to hide. Call me Grandma Catherine if that's okay with your father. Sophie looked at Marcus for permission. He nodded, swallowing hard. Robert shook Marcus's hand at the curb. I'd like to take you to lunch next week. Just the two of us, if you're available. Marcus's suspicion must have shown because Robert's mouth twitched toward a smile. Not an ambush. I want to understand your work. Forensic accounting, you catch people who steal from their companies. Essentially, yes. I analyze financial patterns, identify irregularities that suggest fraud. Interesting. I have a colleague dealing with some irregularities in his portfolio company's books. Would you be willing to consult paid naturally? Your standard rate plus a premium for short notice. The job offer disguised as a lunch invitation. Marcus could see it for what it was, Robert trying to help to bridge the gap, to prove that accepting assistance didn't mean accepting charity. Elena caught Marcus's eye, gave the smallest nod. Take the risk. Give them a chance. Sure, I'll bring my calendar to lunch. They parted with tentative warmth. Not the instant reconciliation of movies, but something more realistic, damaged people trying to do better. Sophie waved at her new grandparents from the back seat of Marcus's Honda, and they waved back like real family instead of adversaries. In the car, Sophie bounced with excitement. I get to take real art classes at a museum. With Grandma Catherine, Marcus met Elena's eyes in the rearview mirror. She sat in the back seat with Sophie, choosing the child over the adult position in front. Always choosing Sophie. He mouthed, thank you. She mouthed back, I love you. And for the first time since that Christmas night 3 months ago, when a stranger had asked an insane question, Marcus let himself believe it might actually work.